Welcome to UK Cinema History, Episode 1, The Tragedy of William Frieze-Greene, The Mystery of Louis Le Prince, and the Creation of Cinema. With me today is Fiona Powell. Hello, Fiona.
Hello, Eric.
All right. So we're going to talk about two people who, within the country of the United Kingdom, and in England actually, can be credited as having invented, in the first case, the motion picture camera, and in the second place, the first motion pictures. And the first one we're going to talk about is William Frieze-Greene, which, Fiona, I happen to know is a man you have a soft spot for historically.
Oh, that makes it sound like I have a romantic soft spot for him, which I haven't. I just have tremendous respect.
A historical soft spot for him.
Okay.
Yes,
Fair
yes.
enough.
For respect for his achievements. Now,
Huge respect for him, yes.
When I were but a mere lad studying cinematography in college, I learned two things. The first was that beer was a perfectly acceptable substitute for food. And the second was that in 1895, the cinematography, as it was called then, or the motion picture, sprang straight from the brain of Thomas Edison and was picked up by the Lumiere brothers. And the next thing we know, we had Marvel films. And of course, both turned out to be completely wrong. You have to at least get a pack of ramen noodles or something with the beer, or otherwise you get sick. You learn things the hard way. Surprise, surprise! I never graduated. So the first person that we're going to talk about is William Frieze-Greene. And this is a man who was born William Greene in 1855.
September the 7th.
See, I picked the right person. And he had an apprenticeship under a photographer named Gutenberg, where he learned the darograph process of chemically treating glass to reproduce images. However, he sued him to get out of his contract in order to marry Helena Frieze. And unusual for the time, the two did the hyphen thing with their names, as you once did, if I remember correctly.
No, I've never done the hyphen thing. I've never taken a husband's name, ever. I've always been Fiona Powell.
Oh, okay. My fault. Well, I wish I could edit that out then.
Oh, you don't have to, because people often ask. And
well, but in 1881, he then created his first photo studio in Bath, and it was actually pretty successful, and he was making quite good money. And he actually was able to open several other ones, including the famous one in Bristol, which mistakenly has a plaque out front saying that was where he invented the motion picture camera, which was not true. That happened in Bath. But there he met a man by the name of John Arthur Roebuck Rudge, who introduced him to magic lanterns. Now, magic lanterns, I know you know, Fiona, but this is for the people who are listening on replay, were a device that you could stick these glass plates into, put a lamp in the middle, and spin and project images on the wall, and it would create kind of a carousel effect. And Greene had the idea that these could be projected without having to use glass, and that if you were to up the frame rate, you could create the sense of motion. And at first, these were used for magic lantern tricks. There's a famous one of Greene actually removing his head or making it look like he removed his head and carrying it next to his body. And he was able to create this because a guy by the name of Eastman, whom I'm sure everyone's heard of, George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, created a paper roll of photosensitive paper that could be spooled. So he was able to, he found soak it in castor oil and make it transparent. Now, here's a mistake that a lot of people make when talking about Greene. At this time, he was doing everything on this photo paper. Celluloid was invented on May 2nd, 1887 by Reverend Hannibal Goodwin. And well, that's when he got his U.S. patent, but it was within a few weeks of that. And while Eastman was able to buy the process, that was not available for commercial use until 1891. Whereas the cameras that are considered the first motion picture cameras were actually invented in 1888. So not only didn't he use celluloid at this point, he couldn't have because it was not available. Celluloid was one of those accidental inventions that nobody knew what to do with. People were saying they could use it to make false teeth out of, but at the time, you could just kill an elephant and steal its ivory. They didn't need something to make false teeth out of. And so one of the nice things about celluloid was because they didn't really have a good industrial use for it, it was cheap. So fast forward to 1888, and Greene decides that upping the frame rate is the important thing. And it was decided that 16 frames a second was the goal. So he was able to create a device that recorded up to about 10 frames a second.
I was just about to say he was recording at 10 frames per second.
Yes, you are correct. And he maxed out at 10 frames per second. But the 16 frame per second goal is something he worked on all the way until about 4 years before his death in 1921, with different technologies such as color, etc. But in 1888 he created the first camera, and in 1889 he patented it. And
21st of June, 1889.
And it was written up in a local science magazine and then reprinted in the Scientific American. And in 1890, he rather cutely sent the article to a man by the name of Thomas Edison, people might have heard of in the United States, who wrote back that he'd had the same tech available since 1888, which, Fiona?
Sure, he had.
Yeah, it was a lie. He had absolutely nothing.
That is so typical of Edison. And one of the sad things about Frieze-Greene, in my opinion, is that he constantly was working in whatever field he was working in a collaborative way, because you got the feeling that his philosophy is if we collaborate, we'll get these things done.
And he was so generous about sharing credit too.
Extremely generous.
Which is,
yes. In fact, his early work with Rudge, he fully credited Rudge and said they had worked in partnership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even competing inventors, he was very, very open about, well, I borrowed this from this, and I borrowed this from them, and etc. Especially when he developed his color technology, and when he would later go on to develop the inkless printer, he was quite open about the fact that he had taken somebody else's design, bought it off a shelf, and then reworked it to work without ink.
I mean, his philosophy, Eric, was very much we need to get this thing invented for the good of the future, rather than I'm going to invent stuff so I can get famous.
So, of course, by 1891, he had gone completely bankrupt because he had that kind of an attitude. And he was forced by the court to sell his patent for £500. But he did continue working on cinematography and invented the first spooling that used sprockets, which, according to Peter Domquez, I looked up the pronunciation, who is the nicest fellow in the world and actually wrote his PhD thesis on William Frieze-Greene. It was this design that Burt Akers and Robert Paul used from a blueprint, not from the actual camera itself, because of course Greene never did have a working model, but from Greene's blueprints that created the first 35 millimeter camera in 1895, which they acknowledge, at least according to Dom Quez's thesis, which is, by the way, for a PhD thesis, a very interesting read. Usually they're quite dry, but a series of lawsuits plus the loss of his patent had pretty much thrown him out of the sprockets game, and our good friend Thomas Edison then pulled a fast one with his invention of the kinescope by adopting the sprockets, but then giving them a standard size, so you could only use Edison equipment to run through Edison projectors. And we'll get to, when we get to William Frieze-Greene, the invention of the projector, which is another thing that's credited to the Lumiere brothers, but was actually invented in England. So this is when he created the inkless printing system in 1895, which would have worked except for one thing: it was not archival. It faded extremely fast, which not good for ink. But if he had just gotten over that one hump, and of course that's the story of Frieze-Greene's life, if he had just increased the spool size, he could have gotten up to maybe 12 or 13 frames a second, but he didn't, did he? If he could have just made his inkless printing system archival, he would have had something, but he didn't, did he? That's just the theme of his life. So he goes bankrupt again. But in 1905, he comes back using a prism to recreate color in film. Now the problem with that is, and I've actually seen it. It only works in the theater. And then I did watch the films that his son Claude made using the technique, the open road, but it was in a documentary called The Lost World of Frieze-Greene, which I believe came out in 2006, but don't quote me on that because I didn't write it down, where they had to use some technology to fix it. Now, when I saw it in the theater, it had flashing problems. There was a visual noise, and there was on the sides of the frames discoloration, all of which they fixed for the documentary. But the documentary is fascinating. It was made in the mid 1920s after Frieze-Greene's death by his son, and it really is a beautiful to look at because it's color footage of England, where it literally goes on the open road from Land's End to John O'Groats, or John O'Groats. Is it Groats or Grots?
Groats. John O'Groats.
John O'Groats. Yeah, but it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful to look at, and the colors are extremely rich. So it was a technique that would work. But again, it's 12 or 13 frames a second at the highest, and that was post Frieze-Greene death. At the time of Frieze-Greene's life, the best that he was getting was 10 frames a second, as you said before. But uh, he did go bankrupt again, and actually at one point ended up in jail over debts that he incurred. And the thing was, all of these inventions did make him money. It's just that he kept plowing the money back into his inventions because, as you pointed out, the important thing to him wasn't getting rich and famous. The important thing to him was creating motion pictures. Now, let's take you up to his death scene. England's film industry has been decimated by first the World War I because they closed all the cinemas to redirect the effort towards the war effort, and second because of the Spanish influenza epidemic, which closed all the theaters. And there was a large meeting of the filmmakers, and they were all at war with each other about what to do. Some wanted to just abandon it altogether. Some wanted to just kind of hold showings in their living rooms, and some were talking about trying to create an export market because they had nowhere to show their films. Uh, and Frieze-Greene was a very sensitive man, and he made this very loud plea from the floor that everyone needed to get along or there wasn't going to be an industry. And he was invited up to the front to speak. And he gave a big and passionate speech about togetherness in the face of this and how we were going to all get through it. And he was applauded by everyone. Walks down off of the platform, uh, grows a little faint, is helped outside, makes his way to a park bench, and promptly dies of a heart attack. Was it who was it who said of Truman Capote's death it was a good career move?
No.
Well,
No,
it
no,
was.
no, no. I won't let you talk about Frieze-Greene that way. Sorry.
I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, but this was a man who had, I believe, 6 shillings in his pocket at the time of his death, and
One
absolutely nothing in a
shilling.
bank account.
1 shilling.
Oh, thank you for correcting me. You know how I
In a
love that.
little leather purse, which is still around.
Well, that is a great collector's item. But this led to a reappraisal of his contributions, and a large parade was given for him, which uh, this was somebody who had been completely forgotten, and there was this idea that they were making up post-death for this forgotten figure. And his son Claude became a cinematographer and was able to carry on his legacy. And now this scene of him having a heart attack on the park bench was the ending scene for the film The Magic Lamp, which starred Robert Donat as William Frieze-Greene, which came out in, I believe, 1955. Yes, 1955. Yeah. Oh no, 1951. And it had a slew of cameos. For instance, there was a story. How true it is, we don't know, because most of the magic lamp was not particularly well researched, but that when he had first gotten the moving images to work, a police officer was going by, and in the best scene in the film, Laurence Olivier plays that police officer who comes in, sits, and says he wants to watch another movie. But The problem with the film is it's a biopic, and you can count the number of good biopics on one hand. And I had originally kind of thought of recommending this to one of the film clubs here on Clubhouse, but then I went to watch it, and it's I had seen it probably, I don't know, 20 years ago, and I didn't remember it being particularly bad, but it took me 3 days to watch that film. It's just a slog to get through. And it has a ton of inaccuracies. It is yet another one that has him working with celluloid, just as an example. But there are just a ton of inaccuracies all the way through that I can't even list here. It is one
But
of Martin Scorsese's
that's the
favorites.
nature of biopics,
Yep. Yep. But the other thing is, while it's
especially in the
beautiful.
1950s, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it is beautiful to look at. But
The good thing about that film is that it brought his name to public attention. The bad thing
mhm.
about that film is that it brought his name to public attention.
And that's exactly right, Fiona. Gosh, that's genius. Yeah, yes, because uh, the problem was not what he claimed, it's what other people claimed that he had achieved, you know, that's what created that backlash against him. Was people saying, well, this is the man who invented motion pictures, and all of the rights were stolen from him, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where you get these rumors that he stole other people's ideas. There's no evidence of that. And as we said before, he was very generous with co-collaborators in terms of credit. There was the idea that his camera didn't work. Well, um, I'll tell you, they have great reconstructions of these cameras, and Peter Damque has actually worked with them, and I've actually seen the footage shot with them, and they do work. They do work. You know, now there are flashing problems, and there's visual noise, and there's all sorts of other issues that would have been worked out. You know, where no one is saying he birthed cinema in its perfect form, but and the low frame rate does make it rather jerky and hard to watch today. But at the time, it had to have been extremely impressive. And he is, I think, a figure who should be remembered as at least one of the fathers of cinema in terms of having invented the camera. Now, he never invented a camera that could record and play on a different projector. That was the issue. And so you didn't have the ability to have eyewitness testimony to, I saw William Frieze-Greene's film of London Square in 1888, because that never happened, because everything he did was in the lab and through the patent office. He never had that big show. But it at the end of his life, it was understood that what he had done had been influential enough to launch uh, a, a big enough interest that other inventors were able to take his technology and create the cinema that we know today. And that, I think, is a big legacy. Now, I will say about the film, the Magic Lamp, it did lead to quite a few plaques being put up in his honor, one of which misspelled his name wrong. His headstone actually has the patent number for it, and the patent number is wrong. They got a 1 and a 3 reversed on it. There's a video. I have it up on the Facebook, and also for people who are in the clubhouse. I put it on the front of the clubhouse page of Michael Redgrave actually dedicating one of those plaques and talking about the great innovation of William Frieze-Greene. But that was one of the plaques that actually was put into the wrong place because it claims that the camera was invented there when it was actually invented in Bath, just as an example. So and unfortunately, these are the type of things that the people who want to diminish his contribution use to say, well, this was just a hurried attempt to try and give England a post-war credit for a French American invention. And that's not the case. But as you said, the best and worst thing that ever happened to him was the amount of attention that he got after that film came out. Also, it's one of Martin Scorsese's favorite films, but also remember another one of Martin Scorsese's favorite films is Ishtar. And I will admit, I watched Ishtar all the way through in one sitting. I couldn't do that with the magic lamp. But
well, I could. So
well, I'm more sensitive than you are, Fiona.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Yeah. Yeah. If I don't get my 4.5 hours of sleep, I'm just useless. But two things that he should always be remembered for is the sprockets, which again, without his invention of the sprockets, the 35 millimeter camera never would have worked, because there's no way you could have held a frame that big without sprockets. And the second one is the fact that he was the first person to actually record onto a transferable medium. Now it was photosensitive paper, not celluloid, but moving images without having to use multiple cameras, like Edward Muybridge, of course, well known, also an Englishman who. You know who he is, right? The man who set the 16 cameras up to take the pictures of the horse so that he could prove that all four legs left the ground. Yes, yeah, and insisted on spelling Edward in the original Anglo-Saxon style, and then yeah. Anyway, a very strange guy. He shot his wife's lover and went on trial and was found not guilty because they basically said, "Well, guy had it coming, I guess." But anyway. But that was 16 different cameras. And the next person that we're going to talk about, which is Louis Le Prince, actually had a single device that he built earlier than Greene's, but it actually had 16 lenses, 4 rows of 4 lenses. And
now I know absolutely nothing about Louis Le Prince.
Well, you're about to get educated. Because Louis Le Prince is my jam. Now, to begin with, Louis Le Prince was not born in England. He was born in Metz, which at the time was France. Then it would become Germany. Then it would become France again. Then it would become Germany. But he was born in 1840.
Part of the world that the great Sarah Bernhardt, when she was asked, it was part of the Alsace-Lorraine, and Germany held it at that time when Sarah Bernhardt was at her height of fame. And Kaiser Wilhelm said, "I will pay you anything if you come and perform for me." And she just sent him back a telegram that said, "The Alsace-Lorraine."
That's a great story. Had it coming. But he was born in 1841 in what was then Eastern France, and he was the son of a French
and
captain.
is again, by the way.
Yes. it would change hands several times during his lifetime, but at that point, yes. And so he grew up trilingual. So he knew French, he knew German, and he knew English because of the area that he lived in. Uh, it had a lot of American industry in it because the Lorraine was kind of an industrial center, and again it was at times German and at times French, but his father was a good friend of Louis Daguerre, the inventor of the daguerreotype, which was the first time that they were able to imprint images on glass and reproduce them onto other objects. Paper would come later, but they were able to create those glass plates. And as a precocious 10-year-old, he actually apprenticed for a while with Daguerre and ended up studying chemistry and painting at Paris and got graduate degrees in both. He did serve in the French army during the Franco-Prussian War, so he served Napoleon III. But in 1869, he married his best friend from college's sister, a woman by the name of Elizabeth, who went by Lizzie Whitley, and they moved to England, where her father owned an iron forge in Leeds, out right there in Yorkshire. And his father-in-law, old man Whitney, was one of these. Well, we had it tough. We used to get out of a shoebox in the middle of the night at 12 o'clock at night and lick the road clean with our tongues, and and that whole Four Yorkshiremen Monty Python sketch type of fellow. But he had made his life in inventions. He invented things for the railroad, and they were always something like he had a patent on a particular bend of a pipe that would work uh, to actually fit into a train station, just for example, uh, which he made a fortune on because without that bend of without buying that exact bend of the pipe, you couldn't fit it around the pipes around certain corners, and they wouldn't have running water in train stations. That sort of a thing. And so he saw from experience that a way to create not only wealth but respect was through inventing something and patenting it and making it his own. But he and his wife, they were obviously a good match. They ended up having 6 children. They founded an arts college there in Leeds together. And when things got rough because of an economic depression, he went to go work for his father-in-law, who sent him to the United States to expand his business over there. He moved to New York, took his wife with him, and there he encountered the art scene. And with his background in chemistry and painting, he got involved in creating what were called panoramas, which were these ideas that you could sit inside of a spinning object and the light coming through would actually show you different scenes and create a panorama around you. And he toured the country with those. His wife and him also had a business back in Leeds where they would take daguerreotypes and take pictures and put them onto coffee cups. They had to be metallic objects, so Yeah, they were a tougher lot back then. They used to drink hot coffee out of copper cups. I know. We take the things we take advantage today. But you try to tell the young people that today, and they won't believe you. But he did eventually gain dual French American citizenship. Uh, but the panoramas were still using the daguerreotype glass, and he wanted to improve them. And he decided to come up with something that could actually capture motion. And it was around this time in the 1880s that George Eastman came out with the rolled paper. And so he created his first camera around that. And just like Greene, he was shooting for 16 frames a second. And it was because of our old friend Muybridge, who had set up 16 cameras, that he'd come up with that. So,
Why was everybody so, why were they all so interested? Speaking as a completely non-film person, why was everybody interested? What does 16 frames per second give you?
it achieves the closest that you can. Well, it's the slowest speed at which your eyeball can perceive motion.
Aha.
So below that, you will see still frames. However, if you speed it up or slow it down, what they called undercranking or overcranking, at 16 frames a second, um, you still have some jumpiness. And they actually had to up the frame rate when they invented sound film to 24 frames a second, because there weren't enough frames to be able to fit audio. And the speed became 24 frames a second up until the digital age, which now I believe my camera says it's at 130 frames a second. The one on my phone. Right now, God knows, they may be at thousands of frames per second for like Avatar and things like that. But the more frames you have per second, the less your eye can perceive that it's being fooled into thinking that it's watching actual motion as opposed to a series of photographs. So if you can imagine, at 15 frames a second, you know you're watching a series of photographs. At that 16th frame in that second, your eye has combined all that information and transferred it to your brain at a rate which allows you to perceive it as motion. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sure if people, including me, really knew that.
Well, I was reading it off of something that I wrote to explain later, so it's good that I thought that. But so he came out with this, and he patented actually in England his 16 frame camera, uh, or 16 lens camera. But of course, this didn't work because, of course, there was a difference in space between the lenses, and so you weren't taking the exact same photo 16 times. So he then went to work on reducing it down to a single lens. And he was originally working on this in New York when he began to suspect that the patent office had spies in it who were leaking out his information.
Okay. Explain. The patent office had spies in it.
So he would apply
You
for a
said
patent.
spies, not spiders, right?
Yeah, spies. So he would apply for a patent.
I was playing with you.
Right. And the patent would be processed. And the first, and he attempted over and over again to get a patent for the single lens version of his camera, and the patent office kept coming back with, "We've already got a single lens camera." He said, "Yeah, but it's not for moving pictures." It's for still photographs. This is going to be and they said, well, Thomas Edison has a caveat on that. Now, caveats are something that the patent office doesn't use anymore, but this was basically somebody like Edison could say, I have this idea. For instance, Thomas Edison at one point got a caveat patent so that if anyone invented a phone that could communicate with the dead, he would get that he would get the right of first refusal. So it was the prince's belief that somebody would file a patent to invent something, and then the patent office would send out a cable or something to Edison saying, this and this invention has activated your caveat number. And Edison would then have a year and the information from the patent to create his own copy of it and then and get his own patent on it. That's what he believed was going on, which we'll get to in a moment. Because he did, once he had moved his production back to Leeds, which he considered much more safe, create the single lens camera. And he was able to create a actual moving image with a single camera at 12 frames a second. So he never did hit the 16. So neither he nor Greene were able to create a complete sense of motion. But if you go to the Facebook page, you can actually see the three scenes that he shot in Leeds for themselves. Now the important one, the one that would come legally, was the one called Roundhay. They call the Roundhay Garden scene. And it was filmed in October of 1888. We know this because it features his mother-in-law, Sarah Whitley, who died 10 days later. So we know for sure that a motion picture was shot before November 1st of 1888. So we know it was at least in October 1888. Now, where he would get into trouble legally, where his family would get into trouble legally, is then proving that it was actually taken with the single lens camera. But we will get to that. But the problem was he only had a patent for a multi-lens camera because the patent office had kept giving him the runaround about the single lens. So, but this is, keep that in the back of your mind. Sarah Whitley had a death certificate for 10 days after this was shot, so we know for sure that it was filmed before the day that she died. So he kept trying to perfect the camera because of the frame rate. It had flashing issues as well, and he got it to a point where he actually did have an expose in Paris, which there are eyewitness testimonies about, but unfortunately there's no press coverage or anything like that in 1889. And his wife was back in New York, and he wrote to her. And we know he wrote to her because he give me 5 seconds here. We know he wrote to her because we actually have his letters to his wife, and he asked his wife to rent a large mansion so that he could premiere his technology, because he said he had perfected it. So he packed it up to ship back to New York. But a year previously, his mother had died and left him and his brother $100,000 in today's terms valuable piece of property. which Louis, not living in France, couldn't take advantage of because he was obviously in New York. So he had made a deal with his brother that his brother would buy the property out, and what his brother would do is rent the property and pay his half. But before he went back to New York, he traveled. We don't know if it had anything to do with the inheritance, but he traveled to go see his brother, and his brother put him on a train to get back to Paris so that he could get back to Leeds so that he could go to New York for the big premiere of his film. And that was the last he was ever seen. He completely disappeared.
Wow. Oh, it was pretty easy to disappear in those days. You just couldn't now, but how absolutely fascinating. So,
well, I don't know about that. I had a friend who got lost once on his way to New York and got off on the wrong freeway, and he didn't turn up for 10 years until we found out he was selling insurance in Connecticut. So, I mean, so it could happen today too. But we don't know what happened to him. The only witness that we have...
That was the absolute last anyone heard. What is the speculation about where he ended up?
Well, there's a lot of speculation. And as a matter of fact, if you read or listen to anything about him, it almost becomes a true crime story. It's almost always about attempting to solve it. The theories go, and I've got to look up his name. Gosh darn it. Paul Fisher wrote a book called The Man Who Invented Motion Pictures, A True Tale of Obsession, Murder in the Movies. It's about 400 pages, and it's basically a true crime drama. And he's come to the conclusion that Albert, who was Louis's brother, killed him over the inheritance money. There are a couple of simple reasons. Number one, he never mentioned to the police anything about the inheritance. Number two, he's the last person to see him alive. Nobody knows for sure that he was on that train. Louis Le Prince was 6'4", and nobody remembered seeing him on the train. So that is why he suspects him. However, nobody else in his family suspected his brother, and they did know about the inheritance. But the police didn't investigate him because they didn't know about the inheritance, and there didn't seem any reason why anyone would, want to kill their brother. Which maybe they didn't have brothers, because I can think of 1,000 reasons why you'd want to kill your brother. But he disappeared on 16 September of 1890, and 2 months later, Edison released his kinescope camera that was almost an exact duplicate of Louis Le Prince's design. And now this wasn't for projectors. This was for those little kinescopes, the ones that they were still using to show porn movies in New York in the 1970s. Well, that's another theory. And
I was joking,
The biggest advocate... Well, I'll tell you who the biggest advocate of that theory is Lizzie Le Prince. She was thoroughly convinced that Edison had him killed. And there were a couple of reasons. Number one, the exact duplicate of the camera coming out exactly 2 months after he disappeared. Now, in the United States, when someone disappears, it takes 7 years before they can be declared legally dead. And so all of their property cannot be touched for that 7 years. So that gave Edison a 7-year head start with the technology. Now, there's your motive. But Lizzie also found out who their spy was, and it wasn't somebody in the patent office. It was their own patent attorney, who was also representing Edison at the time. It was a chance encounter. She was on a boat in New Jersey, and his name was William Dameron Guthrie. Was on the boat, and he was signing documents for Thomas Edison, who was standing there. And she observed that, and it just clicked. And she spent the rest of her life thoroughly convinced that Edison had her husband knocked off. And the actual inventor of the kinescope, or the credited one, was an employee of Thomas Edison named W.K.L. Dixon. And Dixon, because he didn't feel like he was getting enough credit, split off with Edison. And he formed American Mutoscope Company, which would later become Biograph Films, where D.W. Griffiths would do all of his work, etc. And Thomas Edison turned around and sued them, claiming that they had infringed on his patent for the kinescope movie camera. And they went to the La Princes to say, listen, we know your husband invented this camera. We've known all along. And now that he can be declared legally dead, this was 1898, we'd like you to present it in court to prove that Edison can't hold the patent and can't be chasing down fees or shutting down companies for using what was never his technology in the first place. And so Louis's oldest son, Adolf, gathered all the information, every eyewitness testimony that he could get. He got the camera. Now the blueprints disappeared with Louis. They were in his suitcase, which also disappeared. But and most importantly, he got his grandmother's death certificate and the films that he made. So in court, the camera was considered inadmissible because Edison's attorneys claimed that they could have recreated the cameras afterwards. They had 7 years to recreate the camera afterwards and say that it was invented before. So they couldn't use the camera, but they could show the film and the death certificate. And yet the judgment still went for Edison. So Adolf went on a hunting trip on Fire Island and somehow or another died of a headshot, died of a head wound with a shotgun. Now, whether it was suicide or Edison on a one-man crime spree, no, I'm joking, or a hunting accident, we don't know. But the judgment was actually reversed on appeal just a few months after he died. And Edison just simply ignored this. He just simply ignored this and tried to backdate his patent to 1888. And the princess, as usual with these stories, died penniless. And it wasn't until 1915 that the Supreme Court came in and declared that the motion picture industry that Edison had created was a monopoly and broke it up. So Edison had 20 years where he was able to completely dominate the motion picture industry. Now, so two men who created these devices were completely and totally taken out of history and out of any profits for them, because Thomas Edison was able to claim that he had created a motion picture camera that he had absolutely no design for, based on these silly caveats, which we don't have anymore in the United States patent law, thank goodness. But the moral of the story and I ask you this because of your passion for Greene as a historical figure. Um, could Greene or Prince, without having a name like Edison in the front and money from a bank like J.P. Morgan, who was backing Edison at the time, have been able to create a motion picture industry in the first place? What do you think, Fiona? I mean,
Well,
honestly.
had William Frieze-Greene not been working class, had he had the money, had he had the backup, had he had the respect, then he and a number of other people with him, because he would have collaborated, absolutely could have created. And had he lived longer, I mean, don't forget he died at the age of 65,
Yeah,
which seems young, but I mean,
a young man, yeah, child, baby, yeah,
yeah, I mean, he
yeah,
just didn't have the time. He began working in Bath with
mhm,
Rudge in 1876, so it took a long time. They put a lot of work into things, and they were creating something out of whole cloth. It's very different when you're adding onto a creation, when you're adding onto an invention, when you're improving an invention. But to invent something from whole cloth, or even worse, to invent something when there's only something kind of sort of like it already invented, must be incredibly difficult. And I think if all the odds had been equal, if he had not become bankrupt, if he had, if his early work had been respected, uh, then yes. And if he'd had more time, yes, I think he would have. He had the ability, certainly.
Well, I'm of the opinion that he would have had to have collaborated with somebody like an Edison and someone like a J.P. Morgan
But he
in
would
order.
have.
Yeah,
I mean, Frieze-Greene would have collaborated.
I don't know if he would have or not. He doesn't seem like that kind of a cutthroat person because, to honestly, I think, and also you have to imagine money and the misery that having money can bring. Can you imagine somebody as jolly as William Frieze-Greene going around suing everyone for infringing his patents, or in Edison's case, he actually
No, no,
hired
absolutely not. But
goons
I
to,
mean,
yeah,
he wouldn't have
exactly.
done it on his own the way Edison did. Edison was cutthroat. We know this. And a lot of people respect him for it, but he was cutthroat. We know this. This is his known history. What I'm saying is that given the equal opportunity, William Frieze-Greene had the brains, the ability, the foresight. What he didn't have was the money or the time.
Or the mean streak, because
Okay, or the mean
Edison didn't
streak.
Edison didn't just beat his enemies; he destroyed them. You know, you look what he attempted to do to Alexander Graham Bell. You look at what he to well, good God, the goons that he hired uh, to break up the theaters in Chicago for infringing on his patents. If you weren't using Edison
Yes, but
equipment.
we're not going into Edison hate here. We're talking
Mhm.
about
Well, oh no,
Frieze-Greene's
yeah,
ability. So, yeah, we know who Edison was. We know who he was. And I think that constantly bringing Edison back into the conversation is to dismiss the work of Rudge and Frieze-Greene and Louis Leprince.
and that is a very, very good point. But that kind of brings me to another point now. Uh, Obviously, I'm a student of history, and I have a great love of history, and these are great as historical documents. They're not works of art. If you put every single frame of film that Frieze-Greene and Edison made together, including Frieze-Greene's later work in color, you end up with almost 45 seconds of work. So then the question becomes, at what point...
Eric, that's like saying, because the cave paintings were daubs on a wall, they weren't art.
Well, or they didn't create the art industry, I guess I could say.
I mean,
But
what
at a
Frieze-Greene did
certain
produce,
point,
in fact, what John Arthur
does
Roebuck Wright
when does
produced
this...
with his biophantascope, I hope I've said that right, his improved magic lantern, that's works of art. That's art.
And the panoramas of Louis Le Prince are absolutely gorgeous. Some of them look almost like pre-Picasso in his cubism phase, because of the way the light bounced to recreate abstract objects. I mean, and I agree with you 100%. But as we're kind of entering an age where you have artificial intelligence now creating art, where whole screenplays are being written, paintings are being painted by artificial intelligence, where I can go on Chat GPS and ask AI to create a Rembrandt with your and my face on it, and it will create one, and then I can go back
It
and say,
won't create a Rembrandt, though. It won't give
no.
you the same effect that sitting in front of a Rembrandt will give you.
And that's my point, because it's not about the technology, right? It's about the artist.
And I'm saying William Frieze-Greene's work was artistic.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful. What little scraps we have were beautiful. He wasn't just a technician, he was an
Have
artist.
you had a chance to watch the World of Frieze-Greene documentary? The
I've
one they
watched
had on the
little bits of
BBC?
it, yes, and I've watched quite a lot of Frieze-Greene. I've
They,
looked at quite a lot of
yeah.
Frieze-Greene's, what little scraps we have.
Now, his son's work is absolutely
Of
beautiful.
course it is.
The color photography is absolutely beautiful, and that is the only way you're ever going to see uh, um, that 1920s England in color is there, because it doesn't exist anywhere else. You know, so it's also going to be considered historically important. When they look back, but are we as historians, and I kept using the phrase, a true crime drama. Are we being prurient about this? By is this more gossip? Or is
Is
this
what more
history?
gossip?
When we look at the sleazy goings on that got the film industry going,
Well,
and
that's irrelevant. You're asking if this is art, surely.
yes, yeah. I was moving on. You won that argument.
Oh,
Remember,
well,
I'm
hand me
playing.
my gold cup, damn it.
Remember, I'm playing devil's advocate. We're not, so that we can create artificial drama. Remember our conversation? Yeah.
Well, you fail in creating being a devil's advocate if you then have to tell everybody you are. Because I just thought you and I
But
disagreed on that.
another point, and this is one of the reasons I was kind of hoping Royfield could make it, but his schedule was too busy, because I really wanted to talk to him about this. Was when what are now called neoliberals point to a time period that they consider, the perfect amount of regulation. This is the time period that they're talking about, before they had things like the Sherman Anti-Trust Act, before they started breaking up the big monopolies, and when men like Edison were able to completely dominate the field just by having the backing of an unlimited banker, and the ability to take any and everyone to court and claim that whatever they invented he owned, which I think kind of parallels what's going on with things like social media today and AI, where you have only 2 or 3 companies that are in control of this technology. And it was, again, it was 1915, so 20 years later, before they could they finally got enough gumption up to shut this down, both in England and in the United States. And until then, you had one man, Eastman, providing the film, and another man, Edison, providing the cameras. And even in France, the Lumiere brothers, because of the sprocket ratio, were having to use Edison's equipment, and Path had to engineer their equipment and pay Edison a fee all across the world. All cinematography had to go through him for 20 years. And it's an interesting parallel to today, because when they're talking about not wanting to regulate AI, not wanting to regulate the social media companies, not wanting to break up these monopolies, because where else are you going to go? That we're in the exact same situation, you know. Elon Musk buys Twitter, yeah, and so now you have a choice between 2 billionaires, you know.
Or you have a choice not to go onto Twitter at all, which has
Well,
always been my choice.
yes,
But that's a different thing to cinema,
and
surely.
which is why you're so much more sane than I am. But but it is an interesting parallel to today, because the people who have the original IPOs that come out for these technology uh, uh, are completely forgotten, because they're completely overwhelmed by the people who were able to get the money in the backing. And, you know, now, in Eastman's case, he was able to pay off a lawsuit for $5 million for the invention of emulsion celluloid. But in Edison's case, he never paid a nickel to any of these people. Their life's blood and their life's work went in for nothing. Absolutely, nothing. Families were destroyed. As you well know, William Frieze-Greene's own wife divorced him because she couldn't stand living broke anymore. And in many ways, he died a broken man. Despite being a very, very generous soul, and the type of person that you'd want to be in the front of an industry like this. So, but anyway, I'm getting lectury again. Gosh darn it! That's my story. Yeah. Going back to the Lula Prince story, you're going to find that in 2003 there was a college student who claimed she was going through the archives at, according to this article, the University of New York, which does not exist, so perhaps New York University, found a leather-bound, handwritten diary by Thomas Edison that contained a note that someone named Eric had contacted him, that Louis Le Prince was gone, and that his patents were completely safe, that he hated murder, that he was more of an inventor, but that was business. And that the handwriting was then compared to by her professor, who was a handwriting expert, and shown to be Thomas Edison's. And you're going to see it in a supposedly reputable magazine, technical magazine. Now, there's several holes in this story. Number one, that why would such a thing be in the archives at a university library? Number two, given that you had found something like this, why would anyone allow a college student to check it out? How do you know that they're not going to rip the pages up and use them to smoke blunts? Number three, wouldn't there have been a big media sensation if something had been discovered showing that Thomas Edison, beloved inventor of pretty much everything, had committed murder? So if you run across that, I only mention it because every time I bring this up, somebody Googles it and says, oh no, they solved that. Thomas Edison did it. No, they did not. No, that's not. But it's true. I don't know if it was originally an internet hoax, if it was a work of fiction that they printed as if it were fact. I don't know how it happened, but it didn't happen. And I was listening to a podcast trying to research this article, and they cited it as if it were real. They were like, "Oh no, we've actually solved this mystery." Wait till the end.
Happens, but Eric, that often happens.
Oh, I know. I know, but but there's so much more information that's like this that pisses me off. Tom Holland, one of the best, not Spider-Man Tom Holland, but the guy who wrote Dominion, one of the best ancient historians in the world, did an episode of his podcast, the one he does with Dominic Sandbrook. I can't remember the name of right this second, about Louis Le Prince, and made the claim that Louis Le Prince films were so incredibly short because he was hand cutting pieces of celluloid. This is one of the greatest. First of all, what is he doing researching Louis Le Prince? That's like my thing. You should be translating Plutarch or whatever it is great historians do, you know? But number two, you know, the great Tom Holland didn't check his facts before he went out with that.
But I mean, there's just happens.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Something can often happen and still piss you off. But it doesn't often happen with somebody with that kind of
things that often happen that do piss me off.
Well, but you know what that did was it made me wonder how much of Dominion isn't correct. How much of Dominion was half-ass researched, you know? Which, you know, if you look on any top 10 best historical texts of the last 20 years, the Dominion's gonna be in the top three or four. But all it's done is I question everything that Tom Holland does from now on, because if this wasn't important enough to him, and that's why I say if it's not important enough to you that you're going to do it right, then go do what your important thing is, and leave this to the people who consider it important and you know, actually want to do it, but using the facts. Because if Louis Le Prince was actually working in celluloid at that time, then that's a completely different story. And that's the thing people who kind of slip these things in don't understand. Because if that were the case, then not only did he completely invent cinematography and the film industry, and completely outfox everyone else, but he did it 7 years before anyone else. That's the difference between the phony war and the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima in terms of technological time. You know, and this did not happen because things don't happen like that, because it's not true. And I'll get off my pedestal now. Anyway, or soapbox. I'm sorry, soapbox. Very good point. Anyway, thank you for coming, Fiona. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about Fiona Powell?
They can look me up on Facebook. I'm
What
there
if they
under
wanted to
Fiona
listen to some
Powell.
now? If I wanted to listen to some folklore in an extraordinarily beautiful accent, where would I go?
I do have a folklore page on Facebook, but it's a little dry at the moment. But if you find me on Fiona Siobhan Powell on Facebook, then we can connect. I tend to like to do things in
Excellent,
real time.
excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for coming along for the
And if
ride,
they want
Fiona.
to hear my
I
opinion
learned a
on,
lot. I hope you learned
if
something.
they want to hear my opinions on my experience of William Frieze-Greene, they can connect with me on Facebook, and I'm happy to share that.
Yeah, and if they want to hear your opinions on anything, just ask you.
They don't even have to ask.
Yeah, this was wonderful of you, Fiona. Thank you very, very much. And
My pleasure.
yeah, uh, this isn't going to be the best thing that you've ever done, but it's the nicest.
Oh, none of the above, Eric. I always enjoy talking with you.
And I always enjoy talking to with you. Next week we're going to be doing Ealing Studios, and so it's going to be more fun, less history, and more movies. We get to talk about fun things like the Alec Guinness films. They, those great comedies like Tight Little Island, aka Whiskey Galore, um, and also more modern films like The Iron Lady and Imitation Games. We're also Ealing Studios because so we get to span a nice period of time and talk about some really excellent movies. So I hope you can come back with me then.
Thank you very much, Eric.
All right, and I hope everyone has a great day. I'm ETROMMATER on Twitter, and have a great one.
Take care, Eric.
Want to join the conversation? We're at the Clubhouse app every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just look for the room called UK Cinema History every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you can join us.